as well. So that is the session starting to record. So we're going to be talking about using apps to collect carbon data. And if you saw in the description for the event today, it was more about what apps there are available that collect data on kind of carbon reduction, and what apps are available to kind of track behavioural changes. That one is a little bit more difficult, but we'll go through those kind of apps that we've been testing out and trialing, and you're probably familiar with some of them, but maybe not so familiar with others as well. Just the kind of agenda is just a brief agenda today because we have only got an hour in this session, so trying to cover what we feel are the most important things in this session. So we'll be talking, firstly, we'll be popping into breakout rooms for a short discussion on apps that you've used, and then a run through of available apps. They're not just apps, some of them are websites that you can log into and look at that data. And some questions at the end if you have any, or if you wanted to stay on for a discussion, then you can feel free to do that as well. So firstly, we are going to pop you into breakout rooms for 8 minutes, groups of 3 to 4. And just in your breakout rooms, just talking about, what apps have you used to collect data on emissions? And what did you find the advantages and disadvantages of these apps were? What we'll do is when you come back into the main space, we'll go around each of the breakout rooms asking for some feedback. So if someone, if you just nominate someone in your breakout room to be the person that feeds back, and it'll be great to hear your perspective as well before I run through and Aleister runs through the available apps. So what I'll do is I'll pause the recording just now before I drop the screen down. The recording is now resumed, so thank you for that discussion in the breakout in terms of apps that you have experience using. But I'll click on to what we've had experience regarding. And some of you have probably already come across this and not necessarily thinking that was the apps that we were going to be talking about. If you've been on our community leader carbon literacy, this is one of the websites we said to use to calculate carbon emissions. It is a very, very basic tool. It's a good starting point, and it's also a good engagement tool. So if you're talking to your community about climate change, you want to encourage action in them to reduce emissions, then this is a really good starting point to say, right, go and find out roughly what your emissions are and what kind of area that your emissions are higher in, whether that be home energy or whether that be waste, and then can have a discussion on where to reduce emissions from there. So it's a good, as I said, it's a good community engagement tool. The kind of things they ask you about, there's 4 separate elements to the calculator. So for food, it asks you about your diet, so whether you eat meat or whether you're more vegetarian diet, roughly how much per week you spend on takeaways, how much food they reckon you waste, and it's not in kilograms. What they ask you is, do you waste a lot of food, not so much, or none at all? And also food buying habits. So what kind of food do you source, local and seasonal, or do you just source higher carbon foods? So it's breaking down the travel as well. So how do you travel? So what's the mode of transport, hours spent traveling, any return flights you've made, and do you offset these flights? In terms of the home element, this is more about kind of energy and how many people are in the house. They ask you what type your house is, whether that be a flat or semi-detached, detached, number of bedrooms, the number of people in your home, how you heat your home. And this is a limitation here in terms of how you heat your home. It only has electricity, gas, oil and wood as an option. So if you've installed things like a air source heat pump, it doesn't include that information. And temperature you keep your home at, and any energy efficiency improvements. The last element it gets to is the stuff part, so what you've purchased in the last year, your monthly spend on things such as beauty products, pet food, if you've got any pets, your spend on internet and clothes, and what you recycle. So there's a whole host of different things they ask you, but it's not like the the specifics. So it's not like your kilowatt hour on energy, it's not the amount of miles you travel, or it's not about the kilograms of food that you waste. So it's not, it's not completely accurate. I say it's a really good starting point. It's good for engagement, and it's good to kind of start that journey on awareness of your carbon footprint. The WWF also have a new app that they've released. It's called My Footprint. So if you just go into the App Store on your phone, I'm not sure what Android use, but if you go into that and then you can search My Footprint, it will show you that. So basically, this app sets you challenges that you can do. So you can sign up or wasting less food, donating clothes, eating less meat, and then it tracks your progress on these challenges. The one thing I've not seen with these challenges, though, and the limitation of this is, although it tracks your progress of these behaviours, it doesn't seem to show a CO2 saving from this. So it's not collecting information on carbon data, it's more on the behaviour change aspect. It could be useful for a community challenge, though. So if you're trying to encourage people to waste less food, then this app could be something that you use to track that. So people complete these challenges and they submit to you what the result was at the end of that challenge, although, as I said, it doesn't have the CO2 saving. And then this is actually the title of the website, Carbon Footprint. This is a more involved carbon footprint calculator. So hopefully if I click, actually I've not shared my screen, I'm just sharing the presentation. So if I click this, it won't show you. But this it asks for more specific detail. It asks for your kilowatt hour data, it asks for your miles traveled and the mode, and it asks for things like what you purchase and stuff. So it is more accurate in a sense. There are still a lot of assumptions it will make, but if you don't really like the WWF element, you want kind of a better breakdown, then the carbon footprint website is a better one. The thing about this is it allows calculation of carbon footprint for individuals or small and large businesses. So it's a good footprint for this. Once you've completed your footprint as well, there's also an opportunity for you to offset your emissions at the end. So you can click on this and I think it charges, you would pay a certain amount and it would plant some trees to offset those emissions. I'm always very wary of these things, whether that is actually the case. I've not flown in about 4 years, but when you book flights and you get to the end and they ask you whether to offset those emissions, I'm not really sure entirely how that works.
Sorry, just thought before we go into this slide, just on the carbon footprint thing, it's quite a good. They also have a standard that they use. I think it's sort of bronze, silver, gold type thing. So it's also so organizations can kind of approach these guys and go through that process. And like you said, Claire, you can do it. You can use the calculators for either individuals or businesses. And for businesses, there's there's 3 scales. You can do a small scale free version, and then if you pay a little bit more, a bit more of a license, you can basically get more advanced tools that kind of work for better, bigger organizations, and kind of take in more data and stuff. So they're quite good in that kind of thing, and they're also good. You can contact these guys to try and help you with a carbon management plan as well. So again, they go into a bit more detail, but there's a cost attached to that as well. But just thought I'd mention that. A lot of these things that we're showing you now are the sort of the free versions, but then there are versions you can kind of pay to get more detail and stuff.
Yep. Okay. No, thanks, Aleister, for adding that additional information, because I wasn't aware of that element to it. So yeah, thanks for that. The Croft Carbon College, you might have heard of them. We're a CCF funded project organisation called Earth in Common. They are based in Leith in Edinburgh, but as part of their CCF project, they developed their own app, and it's free. It's a really cool app, and it collects information on food, travel, energy, waste, waste and consumption, and water use. So it's a very user-friendly app as well. And as well as it tracking your carbon emissions on these elements, it provides tips to reduce your impact. So what specific things can you do to reduce your emissions in each of these areas? Okay, I'm just going to pause here as we have Sydney from Shrub going to talk to us about, they've got a really cool tool, I think it's attached to their till, which collects some carbon information. So what I'll do is I'll pause that recording just now because I'll have to drop my screen, and it'll obviously show the screen deck. So I've resumed the recording there because the presentation is back up. And oh, there we go. I'm going to pass on to Aleister actually. Aleister, do you want to control the slides? Are you happy for me to just keep this up and you just click next?
Actually, Claire, I was going to say, could I share my screen?
Yeah.
I'm just going to, because I've got the actual tool itself up, so just so I can kind of move my mouse around a little bit. And
yeah, no problem. I'll pause the recording just to stop.
Kind of the tools, if you like, actually, it's probably better to say that we have two tools. And one is what we call the carbon estimator. And the other one is the carbon reporter. And then basically the difference between these two tools is it just boils down to the carbon estimator is for the application stage. And it basically gives you a sense of with the project that you've planned and the activities you're going to do and the number of people you're going to engage with, what are your likely savings? What could you save if that was your plan? The carbon reporter tool is then kind of marries up with that and kind of lets you go down to the detail of it and actually helps you monitor throughout the project to see how realistic that was and what your actual savings might be. So to begin with here, so just the carbon estimator tool, as we kind of said before, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So just in that itself, there's some pluses and minuses to that. Even just as simple as, if you're using Microsoft or Apple products, Excel can either work nice and smoothly or it can be a bit of a pain. But we thought that, just generally speaking, Excel is quite a commonly used tool and for the most part doesn't break down too much from the point of view of setting up a tool. But obviously, it's been through a few iterations. As you can see here, we're currently on version 6.0. It has gone through quite a few iterations and had little tweaks and upgrades as we've kind of come across bugs and updated it a wee bit. But essentially, as you can see here, this is kind of obviously geared up to people putting in the name of the project, an organization name, and we put in the reference number and stuff. But this first page here on this tab is just kind of showing, just giving instructions on how to use it. I think that's one of the main things when you're kind of giving someone an Excel spreadsheet to kind of use is having a clear set of instructions. And also as part of Claire's kind of CBP program, we also had sort of webinar sessions like this where we actually ran through it and actually gave people a bit more detail of how to use it. So, and air any questions they had. The rest of this spreadsheet, the estimator tool, breaks it down in different themes. So there's energy, there's food, there's one for community buildings, travel and waste. And basically the idea is here for each tab, it kind of gives you a set of instructions and a bit of an introduction to how to use it. But essentially what it's doing is it's asking you to put in a bunch of data about your project, about your community, and there's formulas in the background that kind of calculate the potential savings. So of course, depending on the kind of theme, there's different kinds of sort of activities and sort of outcomes you might want to have. So for instance, quite commonly with an energy project, the outcome or the idea the thing you're trying to change is reducing energy consumption overall. And then you select the activity, and doing that, you might be doing that in a bunch of different ways. It's quite self-explanatory in a way, but for when it isn't, there is also sort of guidance notes to try and help out with that. But it's basically a sense of, you type in your activities, the number of households, and this one here as well to kind of get a weighting of how many people, you say you're going to work with 100 people, but how many people are actually going to take that on. So filling in this data and some of the other data about your council area is basically going to give you some of the sort of estimations at the end. I'm going through this quite quickly because it is quite a complicated tool and there's a lot more detail to it, but essentially it's a case of chucking in the data about your community and your project, and it'll give you some estimations at the end. This top section here, when I've sort of just chucked in a few bits of information about the council area, that's because the tool itself has built in some assumptions and some baseline data on, what the kind of split of the type of energy being used in those different council areas. And that just kind of goes back to the piece about accuracy. So it kind of gives you a bit more of an accurate idea of where you are in the country, what the emissions are already kind of, what the baseline emissions or the current emissions or energy usage is in that area. So similarly for some of these other things, it's a case of putting in the kind of outcome you're trying to do and a whole bunch of activities, number of people and percentage of people taking that up. So at this point, the carbon estimator tool probably has some applications outside of just applying to the CCF as well. It's quite an interesting tool just to kind of use and say, throughout a project, we're going to run these kind of activities with this many people. What kind of emissions could we kind of hope to achieve? So in that sense, it's quite good, I guess, for applying for funds or giving you an idea of a project impact. But yeah, there's also kind of other ways you could use it again as well. Yeah, so I think that's the kind of, you put this is sort of a lot of information in here. You then have a tab here, which basically gives you an idea of what kind of data you're going to have to collect. And that's right. So I need to enable macros. So what I've just done here, what's built into this tab here is basically once you do put the information and the kind of activities and numbers into these other tabs, this tab here basically gives you an idea of what kind of data you'll need to collect throughout the project to actually see how valid the assumptions and the estimations of carbon savings are. So you can see here, for instance, for the reducing household energy consumption, we've chosen to do it through workshops, work with 100 people, etc. It then says here, the type of data is going to be, getting meter readings, getting energy usage from individuals during the project. And this tab here is basically data collection method. There's a separate set of guidelines basically on how to do that, how to collect the data off people. But it gives you an idea of the kind of the units and I think about sample sizes as well. At the end here, the totals, it gives you per theme, the kind of project, so kind of the savings that you might actually get during the project itself. So whether it's 1 or 2 years, and then the lifetime savings. So basically with the impact you've had with individuals, what the savings likely to be after the end of the project. They'll have some sort of residual effect. People carry on saving emissions. What might those be after the project finishes? So that's quite a whirlwind whistle-top tour of the tool. Claire, I'm just looking at time and stuff. I don't know whether actually it's worth going into the reporter as well, or maybe I'll just. Sorry, Claire, you're on mute. Claire, sorry, you're on mute. Claire.
Sorry, I thought I'd took myself off mute there. I had used a shortcut to take myself off, but it didn't happen. So, yeah, so I think we've got 15 minutes left. So I think the estimator is a good starting point for us to have chatted about.
That's fine. I'll just wrap up quickly. So basically with the reporter, there's a similar kind of tool. Again, it's Excel. It can be a bit kind of complicated to get used to, but we had a training session to try and help people through it and some guidance notes. And essentially it's set up in a similar way to try and compare between what the sort of estimator said you were going to save and what you then saved during the project. And the reporter is more about, collecting data from participants, putting it into the spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet does the calculations for you and gives you a saving at the end. without going into a whole loads of detail, this kind of tool was built around kind of CCF projects and the kind of activities they do. It was good because it does give quite an accurate figure and doesn't rely too much on assumptions. Some of the other tools out there do have quite a lot of assumptions based in, and also they're not that good for sort of accumulating lots of different individuals. That's the benefit of a tool like this. It means that for, you know, working with 100 people, you can get information from them, put this in here and say, actually, you know, what is the overall impact of that from a community level rather than just an individual level. So yeah, so I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Recording here. So Aleister's spoken about the estimator. Oh, it's not moving on. Okay. Just actually, before I go on to that tool, I just wanted to mention that if, like, I am a spreadsheet geek, I absolutely love spreadsheets, and I enjoy using the actual emissions factors to track emissions. So it was called DEFRA, the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I think now it's the Department of Energy, Industry and Business that manages the kind of carbon element in the UK government. But every year they release emissions factors, and there's emissions factors for each of the different themes. Here's just an example of the emissions factors for fuel. So natural gas is included here, and also this is just an example for transport in terms of diesel and petrol. We'll always use the carbon dioxide equivalent element, as that contains all of the kind of greenhouse gases captured into one element. At the start of lockdown last year, when we all started moving to working from home, decided to create a spreadsheet that would track how much I was saving on travel versus how much I was using on energy, and whether I was actually you know, creating emissions basically working from home, or whether that was a net saving of emissions. And it turned out in the summer months, no surprises, it was a net saving of emissions. But as we went into winter and putting the heating on more, and you know, being darker and using more lighting, there was kind of more of a balance on the emissions. So you can do those things. You can track every aspect of your life using a spreadsheet. It is very detailed, but it will be more accurate there. So if that's something you're interested in, then you can log on to, just search in Google DEFRA emissions factors, and it will show you the most recent ones are from 2020. The last app I want to walk you through today it's one called Geeky. And it basically gives you a score. So it's almost like a credit score, as it were. And then it shows you your kind of impact here. So this is the target, the first part. Here's the global average. Here's me. And this is the kind of UK average here. So it kind of shows how well you're doing. It's free to use. It is very simple. It just asks you a few questions. It's not as involved as the WWF website. It asks you a lot less than that. Also, as well, it gives behaviour change suggestions and the impact that makes. So let me see. Hopefully, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this website. Aleister, can you see that?
Not just yet, Claire, no.
No, okay, that's obviously not shared my screen there. Bear with, because I would really like to show you all this before we kind of stop recording.
Has got somewhere in it. It'll have if it's done properly, that somewhere on the website or somewhere on the app, it'll say that, you know, it'll have references and say what kind of figures it's using to calculate what it's got. And those emissions factors basically work by, you put in an amount of activity data, times it by this figure, and it tells you how much carbon that produces. And basically, you know, what determines how usable or how accurate a kind of carbon tool is how many assumptions it uses in it. So all those emissions factors are used to measure a specific kind of activity. if you want to try and simplify it rather than having to get to the level of detail of how many miles you've driven in a car, or how, your kilowatt hour usage of energy, you can basically put in assumptions. So you can basically say the average person, if you say that you use the car a lot, that equals X number of miles per week. And basically that's the difference between how accurate or how usable you've got a carbon tool, is the number of assumptions you put into it. So for instance, with the carbon reporter tool with the CCF, not a lot of assumptions. You have to collect a lot of data, a lot of accurate data. But what the tool does is it kind of, from that data, extrapolates what the likely kind of impact is for the people you didn't manage to get lots of intricate data off. But a lot of these other apps basically don't go as far as that, and they just put in a lot of assumptions. Say, if you drive once a week, it equates to roughly this amount of carbon emissions, and kind of extrapolates that way. So that's one of the big differences between the kind of all the different tools that you'll see out there. So yeah, sorry, Claire, you've got the...
No, thanks, Aleister. It's good to have additional input onto that and how it works. Just to kind of finish us off there, as I mentioned, the Geeky app, it has a credit. It's like a credit score. The higher your score is, the better you are. I'm not actually sure what the maximum score is here. Perhaps 999, like a credit score would be. But you can track your progress as well. As I mentioned, it gives you some suggestions that you can do. You can click that you already do this, it's not for you, or I'll try it. So avoiding plastic wipes, which is, I do that anyway. I just wanted to see what impact that had on my score. So increased it by 1 there. And if I just go back up, it'll show you, you can click done. And I think that should, yep, it increases your points. So if you commit, you click to commit to something on this app, you try it, you do it, and you click done, it increases your score every time. So this is a good one for tracking both your emissions and also the impact that any behaviour changes you commit to make. So I think out of all of the ones that we've spoken about today, for simplicity and tracking these elements, obviously it's not 100% accurate, but I think this is definitely the best one to go for, or Croft Carbon College's app as well. Okay, well, I am going to stop the recording rather than pausing it. Thank you very much for listening to us this afternoon. I know it's been a very, very short webinar, but these are 1-hour webinar series that we're running. If you have any questions after this, please feel free to stay on